Welcome to this Leaders Lounge session. My name is Harry Yeff. I'm here with ITU representing the A.I.V.I initiative, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But this is a open conversation really about the role of the arts, and it's actually a completely fair question that it's a difficult thing to define, which is something that we were just discussing when it comes to genuine contribution of creative practice in innovation. And the idea of an artist in research, or the challenges that AI is bringing to the sentiment of creativity, is very complex. And this session comes under a very simple sentiment. When you observe the emerging arts, when you look at new technologies, there tends to be an artistic first wave that brings these innovations into the minds of general public. Obviously, inside of laboratories, inside of institutions, the systems that we create, the efficiency of those systems, if they never involve a human being, this is a challenge of efficiency. But as soon as the general public, as soon as human beings have to interact with these technologies, there comes a challenge of narrative. So we're really interested in how new storytellers, how facilitators, academics, institutions can collaborate in interesting ways to effectively undo science fiction and create these new stories that are used by generations as we move forward. So we have Diana and Gadi with us today. I'm just going to open up the floor to both of you to introduce who you are and where you're from. Gadi, please start.
Thank you. My name is Gadi Sassoon. I am a composer from Milan, Italy. I've been collaborating with Harry on the piece that you heard me perform this morning, which was born out of our collaboration with the Leipziger Ballet and our Leipzig Opera last year. And I've been working with music and technology for about 20 years now, ever since I graduated university in America at a very different technological juncture. And my work has been sort of developing through various iterations in the world of soundtracks, in the world of record making, in the world of sometimes video games and sound design, and then most recently in the world of sort of experimenting with new declinations of electronic and classical music at the intersection between new synthesis algorithms, artificial intelligence, and traditional technique.
Well, hello everyone. How wonderful is it to be together with these terrific fellows up here and with this community exploring AI for good. I'm Diana Ayton-Shenker, and I serve as CEO of Leonardo, the International Society of Arts, Science, Technology. I also direct Leonardo's partnership with Arizona State University, where I'm professor of practice, jointly appointed both at the School of Art, Media, and Engineering and the School for the Future of Innovation and Society. And I'm delighted to be here. Leonardo has been incubating creativity for nearly 60 years at the intersection of arts, science, technology. We do that through our partnerships, our publications, and our programs that we'll touch on a little bit more down the road. My creative practice is personally engaged with my creative partner and husband, the British artist Bill Ayton, and my approach to global social change through a variety of media and sectors and circles, from international law and human rights to venture philanthropy, to social innovation, impact entrepreneurship, and advocacy in academia. It's great to be back at the UN and with all of you today.
So two figures, I would say, two sides of this moon of conversation. And Diana, you mentioned obviously the lineage of Leonardo and this emphasis on not just science and technology, but the creative practice. how has that experience been for you, fusing those three elements together specifically? And what is the function or the driver for you to include creativity in that cluster of ideas?
Thank you. So I don't see the experience, or my experience has not been, nor is my understanding of Leonardo, that we are bringing the arts to science and technology. Rather, we're recognizing the fusion across creativity, recognizing that creativity underlies and drives arts, creativity underlies and drives science, and creativity underlies and drives technology. And the common core practices of creative content development and creation, creative contemplation, creative critique, creative communication and connection, and creative collaboration are core across those arena of activity. So the fusion with art is less of an add-on or an afterthought or a forethought to acrobatically design something that wouldn't otherwise fit. It's more of creating a space and a platform for the intersection and nexus that some crazy folks like us already inhabit.
Because I see this a real importance in the way that you frame it. When we define creativity and we have professional creatives and the kind of sentiment of artistic creative having this anxiety around emerging tech and this concerns about ownership and copyright, I think it's really important to understand this definition of creativity in the way that you're framing it, which is entrepreneurship, leadership, like seeing value or creating value in the unknowns. This is the true essence of creative intelligence. And when you kind of start framing things like that, I think there opens up this whole other set of utilities to artistic practice, and the outcomes are beautiful and very important. But the intimate relationship creatives have with process, especially technology, is deeply fascinating, and seeing new ways that people are working and creating. And one person that I've been fascinated by for many years is you, Gadi. I know that we work together on Fusion as international ballet work, but I'd love for you to touch on just your drive to work with academics to source sound, this idea of the opportunity to write and compose with the backing of academic thought.
Well, that stems from a long-standing interest in, I suppose, on the one hand, the idea of sonic innovation, so the idea of artistic innovation and seeking the tools to explore new aesthetics, really. On the other hand, there's, if I may be so bold, almost a spiritual dimension to it, because you're seeking structures that may be found in mathematical concepts or that may be found in new ways to look at creation, right? So what that translated in for me in my career was when I exhausted the existing sort of horizons of sound synthesis and electronic music production, means of production, I started seeking people that were actually doing active research in that field. And what I found was, perhaps unsurprisingly, just mathematics, really. So, and during this journey, I was, about a decade ago, was approached by a group of mathematicians and physicists at the University of Edinburgh who were trying to really push the boundaries of what was possible with sonic innovation. And this is, it's work that doesn't really pertain to artificial intelligence per se, but it's something that has been rendered possible by the same kind of hardware that has made artificial intelligence the talk of the town, I dare say, right? Because we were essentially, at the time we construed it as a supercomputer, but really it was a series of GPUs in parallel, where we were simulating guitars and trumpets and things like that. traditional instruments, but because at a research level there are no constraints, I could then make guitars that had 1,000 strings and trumpets that were a mile long, being blown by dragon fire and actually actuate the sounds of it. And so this became really sort of a further drive into the exploration of new aesthetic paradigms. And so the conversation that was spurred by an interest that in a lot of ways is quite geeky, right? It's quite nerdy in a lot of ways. Became, for me personally, defining for the last decade of my career in terms of compositional aesthetics, but also created a very peculiar level of conversation with the researchers. And the experience really became prolific when we started finding common grounds and common languages, really, which was, it may sound a little bit banal, but was actually the crux of what made those relationships work.
And could you briefly share just an insight on what you think that practice might have brought to the other side of your team? So not in the artistic, but did it contribute to research thinking? Was there simply an influence on perspective? Like, what was the value for them when it came to working with you?
Well, the real tangible value was outreach, such as it is. So it gave them, in a context of what is essentially physics research, theoretical physics research, it gave them a case study on outreach, which has been quite unique, because the music that I produced through these systems was put out by a record label. It was reviewed and it had its life in the music industry quite successfully so, reaching obviously a relatively niche audience, but worldwide. The research was peer-reviewed, ended up in the Computer Music Journal, but the combination of these two ended up making it into publications like MIT Technology Review. So it tickled the interest of those outlets that look at science and art and culture in a slightly more pop way, if you will. And this had tremendous value, actually, from the point of view of the researchers, because first of all, it opened them up to an entirely new set of audiences, not just one, but multiple audiences. It kind of demystified the endeavor in the first place, but also from the point of view of funding, that is pretty much the holy grail, right? I mean, if the next bout of funding from a body like the European Research Council has been made immensely easier for the various research teams that sprouted from this original stem because of that experience.
So I would say it's interesting, again, this idea of cross-modal research. So you have an artist, you have an academic, there's maybe a problem to be solved, a research context. I guess a similar question to you. Do you have any, Diana, do you have any notable examples of what you think were fascinating outcomes from the research-based partnerships that have come through Leonardo and the coverage that you've done?
Yeah, well, I think that in addition to what Gadi's speaking of outreach and getting ideas out as the impact that's notable from the partnership, there's also an incredible value in bringing in to the process not only of research and scholarship, but development and other practices of new questions, of insight, of foresight, because creatives are asking different questions. Sometimes unexpected questions like, what if? And so what? Those are simple and profound questions that we need to be asking ourselves and each other more, now more than ever. And the artists and creatives who come into these collaborative spaces are those who can pose the questions. So with Leonardo, we create space for that kind of engagement through unexpected partnerships and platforms, not only through our scholarly publication, Leonardo, with MIT Press, that has allowed us to experiment, publishing the first augmented reality art that MIT's published, that Leonardo published, but also tying in with unexpected collaborators and inspirational voices. We've now extended our work to partner with Tsinghua University, and we'll be publishing the first dedicated publication, a special issue of Leonardo, in both English and Mandarin, focused on artificial intelligence and augmented wisdom. This is an example of asking new kinds of questions like, so what? Beyond what's happening with artificial intelligence to what could be happening. How does this augment our wisdom? Those kinds of engagements are an example not only of fusion, but I'd say an infusion of that spark, whether it's a spiritual dimension or another kind of energy. It's that spark of inspiration that has the same response in any language. And it sounds like it's that breath that we take in. We inspire with inspiration. That's what happens with Leonardo, and that's what happens when we bring an infusion of creativity to these sectors, recognizing that it's actually a common language.
So, I guess with that in mind, what are ideas around like frameworks? So, if you're a startup, if you're an institution, what are the kinds of frameworks that can be in place for an artist in residence, for the creation of a project for an artist testing a technology? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, so you mentioned artist in residence, and I can imagine the artist in residency movement that Leonardo has been a part of now for decades, placing creative hybrid artists, art scientists, art technologists into companies like Nokia Bell Lab, where I know you've worked, like our partnership with Jurasi, the fellowship with the Center for Science and Imagination at ASU. Those kinds of residencies I can see being framed with an infrastructure across industry, recognizing that employers today say creativity is the #1 skill that they are looking for in their hires. #1 skill. We have that skill. So creating something like the framework and infrastructure that we're developing of Leonardo core of artists who could be placed in industries receptive to that kind of engagement is one of the kinds of creativity infrastructures, the framework that would facilitate this. Another might be partnering with what we're calling Leo Labs, spaces anchored in particular places of influence that give opportunity for our full cycle of creative engine, engaging with that kind of collaboration across publications, fellowship, residency, research, scholarship, and immersive creative experience through experimental art across all media.
And Gadi, obviously, I'm slightly biased, but an amazing performance this morning.
I'm less biased, and it was amazing.
Thank you.
Just as a question connected to that discussion, what was happening in terms of the performance itself? Obviously, you can share a little bit about fusion, but I know that you were incorporating elements of tech in your creative process. It's something that you've done for a long time. What was the partnership there between you and technology embodied in the performance that we saw?
So today specifically, the sound of my violin was being resynthesized by a bespoke real-time AI system that I've been developing with my dear friends at a company called Datamind Audio, who took 7 hours of my recordings, which is a lot of recordings to produce, but you do need the data set, And then effectively, from then we refined what kind of sounds I wanted to be layering my live playing with. So if you heard, for instance, female vocal textures at one point during today's piece, those were actually being generated in real time as a response to what I was playing with the violin, right? Technology, which is very much in its infancy at the moment, because it does have its rougher edges, but that's kind of what makes it exciting in a lot of ways. And that's an extension of what we did last year with Fusion, where so the piece that you heard today was a rearrangement of a part of the music we wrote for the ballet last year. In that instance, where we also used elements of AI to generate some of the textures, that was more of a studio endeavor. Whereas in this case, a year of research down the line and some good strategic partnerships on that front made it possible to incorporate more of that in real time. Yeah.
It's interesting that a lot of the tech that you're using might be more common a number of years from now, and is in development, that connection between creative and technologists. But what we're also seeing at a much larger scale is these larger bodies, specifically whether it's artificial intelligence or the Apple Vision Pro, there's this sentiment of being too early. And that's a strategic sentiment, is you can have a wonderful idea, but society is not ready. I heard there was a quote from the ambassador session and OpenAI on Monday, and we could see that as a response to a kind of zeitgeist anxiety. Like, the general public have certain narratives, and even if a technology is very powerful or has a lot of potential, the public opinion is very important for the success of said technology. So just in each of your worlds, what are the kinds of anxieties that are coming up for you within your peers, within people that you're working with, specifically with AI? Are there specific pain points or concerns that you think are worth discussing here? I'll start with you, Gadi.
So before coming here, I ran a little informal poll on my social media of my network, which is mostly artists and people of the creative, cut from the creative cloth, right? And the overwhelming response was very, well, I might say negative, but certainly concern, fear, a desire for regulation, which is an unusual thing to be getting out of artists, we're all there. And I like what you were saying earlier. I like that notion of deprogramming sci-fi. I do have a sort of gut feeling that some of this can become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But yeah, it's certain, a certain orthodoxy is almost taking root now, where AI is just coming to get you, right? And I did not really find anyone, or very few people, that were being open-minded about the, well, for one thing, positive impacts outside of the realm of intellectual property, which are often invisible if you're just laser-focused on generative AI as it pertains to image and sound generation and text and so forth. But also just the general, a spark of excitement for the fact that there's a new game in town, a new technology that can be harnessed to do interesting things, right? And I think, by and large, there is a problem of PR that comes from the flood of very specific types of AI-generated content that are being consumed, right? So a lot of the controversy surrounding, for instance, image generation, which is now spilling over into music. But I find that interesting, you see, because there aren't as many tools for music. They haven't proliferated to the same degree of even usability. A little bit more literally in the last 2 or 3 months, but it's having explored that field quite extensively, you don't have the same kind of immediate impact that you have in image generation, for instance, right? So yeah, that's kind of the landscape of being confronted with. Yeah.
Thank you. Same question to you, Diana.
So, I would say that the fear or anxiety, the pain points around AI are inextricable from the the zeitgeist fear anxiety of our time. And that's that we're in this transformative moment of a twin, double helix of transformative forces with the rise of AI, if not the revolution of AI, and the planetary crisis of climate catastrophe and mass extinction. This is big stuff that's making everyone anxious, and I don't actually think that they're separated out. I think that this is the time that we're in, and what people fear is that we're not going to count anymore. That the way we know ourselves to be in relation to ourselves and each other and our planet is fundamentally changing because it is. And that kind of disruption and disorientation around a creative perspective from AI is potentially very terrifying. And it's exacerbated by the narratives of fear you speak of with sci-fi as it's been dominated. But the potential of sci-fi or of our creative imagination of the future to become a narrative of hope is phenomenal at just the point when we need it most. So I actually think this is an incredible time to be a creative, to unleash our imagination that is our birthright, to be creative thinkers and beings and doers, just when we are redefining and reimagining who we are and who we're going to be in a multiple species world and a multiple intelligence world. That's where we are with AI. Now, I think that the other side and the antidote to fear is hope. It's the best inoculation and antidote that we have. And where do we find the most hope? From that which inspires us in our natural and created environment. And that's where the creatives come in. That's where creative intelligence is so essential, because we can imagine not just the good and the bad, let alone the ugly, of AI and a new world rising, but we can co-create the gorgeous. So I come away from that fear, anxiety, pain point environment as a launching pad for incredible hope about the promise of where we are and where we're going.
Well, this idea of shifting from fear to hope, I think there's a huge, vast number of people out there from many different places, many different backgrounds. And the reason for someone to lean into technology can differ, again, whether it's coming from a business standpoint, societal, education, or just being a human being, which is valid as well. What is the role of creativity in reaching those people? Like, do you have thoughts on the actual utility of the creative act in connecting with people that are maybe not in this space right now?
Yeah, you know when you're moved, when you feel excited. Almost everyone can tell a story about a film they've seen, or a performance, or a work of great beauty, or any creative environment that has moved you. You feel it because you feel your breath deepen. You feel your heart beat. And ultimately, you feel deeply connected to something bigger than you. That's a state of awe. And that's something that creative work and experience ignites. So does nature, and so does love. So those are good things too. But what's so special about creative experience and creative work is it can serve as a great accelerator to cut through the time and effort it otherwise takes to be moved. And we know this with change around climate, for example, where we've had an abundance of scientific knowledge and technical solutions to the catastrophe we're now in. Because the science and technology without that creative infusion is not something that moves us, it just terrifies us, mostly. Not everyone, but the masses. So we need that creative infusion to be moved and mobilized. In the United States, we have this wonderful example of that movement with the legalization of same-sex marriage. So this was a decades-long advocacy struggle that was rights-based. Well, we're entitled, and it's this, and it's that. And it didn't address the movement, the fear that people had that for those of us who didn't have the fear, didn't understand. And what changed was the creative thinking of the head of the advocacy movement for same-sex marriage, who said, I want to sit down with the people who are afraid of this fundamental right and ask, well, I don't get why you're afraid. Why is this frightening? Because we've proven why this should be. And the answer basically came down to, well, I don't understand it, it's foreign to me. Or it somehow doesn't fit with how I understand love and commitment. And so the creative thinker asked one of the members of the focus group, well, why did you marry your partner? Why did you marry your spouse? And he said, for love. Doesn't always work out that way, but in this case, he said, for love. And he said, oh, right, because love is love. And it changed the conversation to have that spark. Love is love. And within a year, same-sex marriage was legalized. Because it was moving. That's creative expression, why it's so important.
So awe, experience, and wonder as a catalyst of change. It's this idea of something, this spark, this what I believe through these technologies is becoming a tangible spark. It's something that we can introduce, we can be strategic with it, we can decide, having figures like yourself. Gadi, do you have any final thoughts, something you'd like to share?
I do. On this topic, I think, it's one good reason to involve creatives is that their concerns are valid. It's the fear is not irrational per se, and so I think there is an opportunity in the simple fact that creatives are deeply impacted by these technologies, and so they have a stake at not only creating a narrative just for outreach purposes, but actually steering the general direction of the ship, And so I think that it would be very auspicious to include creatives from different industries at different levels of what is generally conceived as a sort of like a stakeholder structure, because many things will need reframing, in order to generate the necessary regulations and just best practices, even in general. And so I think that would be my one important thought of the day.
And a wonderful one to end things on. So, as a final sentiment, I think we need new language, we need new media, we need new methods for all of the most important ideas to translate, because we can argue, yes, they're functioning, but are they optimized? Is everybody included in this conversation? And as numbers increase, as the power of this technology increases, there'll be more and more of a desperate need to spark a true engagement, a true motivation to understand, to learn. And it's amazing that ITU year by year is leaning more and more into creativity and building an infrastructure for the arts to not only make a space beautiful, but help us think strategically about how we are the final link to the communication chain. So thank you for joining today. Thank you to Gadi and Diana.
Thank you.
Please, a round of applause for our distinguished guests.